It's being called vindication for Edward Snowden. This week, the Washington Post and The Guardian won a Pulitzer Prize for stories based on documents supplied by him. The former employee of the U.S. National Security Agency leaked thousands of classified files to the newspapers. They revealed sweeping surveillance programs, proof that the U.S. government collects a dragnet of data on millions of its own citizens. And Canadians soon learn their privacy is at risk, too. Earlier this season, the CBC's Terence McKenna looked into the depths of the surveillance state. Here again is his feature report.
Last June, in a Hong Kong hotel room, a 29-year-old analyst from the U.S. National Security Agency gave 3 journalists over 1 million documents that revealed massive government spying on foreign and domestic targets.
Because even if you're not doing anything wrong, you're being watched and recorded.
Edward Snowden triggered a global firestorm.
Tonight, the manhunt is on. The FBI joins the search for the man who leaked U.S. spy secrets.
Our federal government is keeping track of every phone call we make.
The National Security Agency is able to tap directly into the servers of 9 big internet companies.
Leaders of Germany and France had no idea a key ally, the United States, was spying on them and their citizens.
Canada has been participating in many of the NSA's eavesdropping excesses right from the start.
Are the Conservatives monitoring the phone and email records of Canadians, yes or no?
NSA, you've gone too far.
The Edward Snowden revelations caused a political earthquake here in Washington, and every new leaked document from him causes severe aftershocks, sending reverberations down Pennsylvania Avenue through the Justice Department, the intelligence services, and the White House. Even the president apparently didn't know all that the NSA was up to, especially the wiretapping of private telephone calls of foreign leaders. Mr. Obama has announced reforms, but the debate about privacy and civil liberties is far from over.
On Capitol Hill, lawmakers are battling over how to reform the U.S. surveillance apparatus. Democrat Patrick Leahy, chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, thinks the National Security Agency is out of control.
I worry, no matter who might be president, no matter which administration it is, that we have any arm of our government able to collect so much information about its citizens. The temptation is going to be there, and will eventually probably be realized, to use that for the wrong reasons.
In early January, Leahy's committee heard testimony from a panel of nonpartisan experts called upon by President Obama to study government surveillance programs and make recommendations for reform.
I think there are 4 or 5 recommendations to do that. One is
the most prominent member is Richard Clark, who was chief of counterterrorism at the White House under Presidents Clinton and Bush.
Well, I think we all run a risk if we start giving up our freedoms. And you give up a little freedom, you give up a little more, you give up a little more. One day you wake up and you have a police state.
George Orwell's 1984 has become a touchstone in this debate. In the story, all citizens had to worry that the thought police could be monitoring their behavior at all times with hidden cameras and microphones. In response to 9/11, the U.S. government doubled the size of the National Security Agency and secretly increased its surveillance powers. In December, a U.S. federal court judgment referred to the controversial NSA programs as Orwellian and probably unconstitutional.
It is Orwellian, but the constitutional issue is the greater one. I don't think our Constitution, I don't think the framers of our Constitution ever intended to give such untrammeled powers to spy. And I would add again, it doesn't make us safer.
After 9/11, the NSA began applying foreign surveillance techniques to U.S. citizens, vacuuming up Americans' telephone and internet records. At the heart of this debate is the collection of metadata, a practice strongly defended by many in the intelligence community. John McLaughlin is the former acting director of the CIA.
Metadata is really nothing more than business records. And I think that there is a terrible, terrible misunderstanding here that somehow NSA is actually reading your email or reading your telephone conversations. This is simply not true. There are millions of these records collected, which are basically like your phone bill. You know, the time of a call being made, the time of it being concluded.
That is changing. The so-called metadata field, the to and from, has other information in it now. It has to and from with names. It has location of where the call was made and when. It has duration of the call. And all of that information put together can tell you a lot. If I trace your metadata on your phone and I'm tracing someone else, I can know that you were together. I can know you were perhaps in the same room. If it's 2 o'clock in the morning, I can guess that you were sleeping together. I can find out all sorts of information from the metadata field that wasn't true 20 years ago.
Before Edward Snowden, other National Security Agency employees had raised the alarm about secret surveillance programs. They were troubled by violations of civil liberties and believed the public had a right to know. Thomas Drake was one such whistleblower who met with a severe government response. Drake was an award-winning military intelligence officer who had a long career as a linguist and cryptographer before finally starting to work as a civilian at the NSA, coincidentally on September 11, 2001. He says he was shocked to see his employers turn intrusive surveillance techniques against the American people after 9/11.
The response in the deepest of secrecy was, forget the Constitution. We're going to unchain ourselves, and essentially became emergency powers, and that meant that, as I was told when I confronted them directly in those first few weeks after 9/11, that meant extraordinary times require extraordinary means. And those means require us to just collect it all.
Did you challenge that right off the bat, or did you go along with that mindset for a while?
I couldn't go along with it because I was eyewitness to the subversion of the Constitution. And so I did everything I could for a number of years from within the system to resist blowing the whistle through a number of proper channels under the Intelligence Community Whistleblower Protection Act. That included Congress, as well as NSA, first NSA, then Congress, and the Department of Defense.
Thomas Drake got nowhere working inside the system. Then, when news of the secret surveillance programs first began leaking out 7 years ago, Drake was arrested along with other NSA employees who had publicly criticized the agency. He was driven across town to an FBI safe house and told a high-ranking government official was waiting for him.
It turned out it was the chief prosecutor. And the chief prosecutor, I stopped because that moment was incredibly chilling. He says, how would you like to spend the rest of your life in prison, Mr. Drake, unless you cooperate with our investigation? And I knew at that moment I could no longer cooperate with the investigation. I said, what evidence do you have? He said, we have more than enough evidence to put you away for a long, long time. You better start talking.
Drake had only spoken anonymously to a reporter about non-secret information, but he was charged with 5 counts of espionage, carrying a possible prison term of 35 years. Eventually, on the eve of trial, the charges were withdrawn and he pled guilty to unauthorized use of a government computer. The penalty was community service.
What I had done was commit an act of civil disobedience. On the other hand, I was upholding the oath, which was prime above everything else as a senior executive in the U.S. government, right? Prime above everything else, to support and defend the Constitution. I took an oath to do that.
Last fall, after Edward Snowden was charged with 2 counts of espionage, Thomas Drake and a handful of other whistleblowers traveled to Moscow to present him with the Sam Adams Prize for Integrity in Intelligence. Back in the United States, opinion about Snowden was divided.
I think he's a national hero.
I think Edward Snowden is a disgrace. He's a traitor.
It's illegal.
We are wiretapping the entire world.
I would describe this man as an American hero.
He's the functional equivalent in the intelligence community of a mass murderer.
As Americans found out more, pro-Snowden sentiment grew. Protesters rallied against secret government spying and invasion of privacy. The latest polls show that distrust of government has skyrocketed to about 80% in the United States. That is based in part on repeated government lying about surveillance in the years before the Snowden revelations.
When this for you, Director Clapper, again on the surveillance.
In this March 2013 testimony before Congress, Director of National Intelligence James Clapper was asked a direct question and lied under oath.
Does the NSA collect any type of data at all on millions or hundreds of millions of Americans?
No, sir.
It does not.
Not wittingly. There are cases where they could inadvertently, perhaps, collect, but not wittingly.
Clapper later apologized for lying to Congress and was allowed to keep his job in the Obama administration. NSA Chief Keith Alexander also lied about what his agency was doing.
We don't hold data on U.S. citizens.
Author James Bamford has written extensively about government surveillance and whistleblowers.
You have the director of NSA coming out and saying, we're not doing this, we're not violating the law. It was this deception of the American public.
Defenders of the secret program say they are only trying to guard against another 9/11 type terrorist attack, and that there is a clear trade-off between privacy and national security.
More privacy means probably accepting a higher degree of risk, which to many people might be just fine. It might be fine. That's a decision that the American public and our government have to make. But I don't think we should fool people. I don't think we should say you can have perfect security, you can have the security you've had since 9/11, and you can give up a lot of these programs that we've developed since 9/11. Because there is a connection between these programs overall in their totality and the fact that the United States has not been attacked again.
In recent months, the intelligence agencies have repeatedly claimed that their controversial surveillance programs have prevented numerous terrorist attacks since 9/11.
Over 50 times since 9/11.
It has the 54 total events.
We know of at least 50 threats that have been averted because of this information.
I actually asked the questions in open session where people have to tell the truth. Well, the 54 went down to 12 or 13. The 12 or 13 went down to 1, and that 1, it was only peripherally involved. It was a case the FBI had under control anyway.
Keeping the nation safe.
The Presidential Commission couldn't find a single case where the telephone metadata program prevented a terrorist attack and recommended that the government get out of the business of collecting and storing metadata.
Combating those risks.
We drew a distinction between the efficacy of the telephone program, and you can argue about that, and the appropriateness of it. Whether or not it's effective doesn't change or alter our view that it's not appropriate. It's not appropriate for the government to keep on government computers a record of every phone call ever made in the United States.
Putting the data where it's supposed to be, where the companies are that collected it.
Author James Bamford argues government shouldn't have unfettered access to metadata now held by telephone and internet companies.
Much as I distrust some companies, but a company can't put you on the do not fly list. A company can't charge you with false crimes because of something they read in your email. So I prefer taking it out of the government's hands. I mean, we don't live in a country where the government should have access to all that.
Can you keep a secret?
When we come back, the story of how Canadian intelligence agencies are using the same intrusive techniques now debated in the United States, and allegations that the Canadian government is lying about it.
CSEC is intercepting and monitoring millions of messages every day.
Canadian artist Charles Stankovic filmed these haunting images of Canadian Forces Station Alert, the northernmost military outpost in the world. During the Cold War, Canadian and American surveillance experts came here to spy on Soviet radio communications. It's still an active outpost for the Canadian equivalent of the National Security Agency, CSEC.
Can you keep a secret? We are the Communications Security Establishment Canada. We're serious.
Like the NSA, CSEC's budget has more than doubled and its staff massively increased since 9/11.
And protect information of national interest through leading-edge technology.
CSEC is erecting this new billion-dollar headquarters in Ottawa. The agency operates almost entirely in secret, with very little government oversight to stop it from intruding on Canadians' privacy.
And the government confirmed that the CSE has not been collecting data on the communications of Canadians.
When it was revealed that the U.S. government was secretly recording and storing the telephone and internet metadata of all Americans, the Canadian government at first tried to deny that it was doing the same thing.
Mr. Speaker, I have been crystal clear. This program does not target Canadians. Megadata is collected only on international, not domestic communications. And Mr. Speaker, its only targeting is for foreign threats, unless, of course, there is a request from an accompanying department under warrant. So the answer is no.
But in early February, that assurance was contradicted by the Prime Minister's National Security Advisor, Stephen Rigby.
I think that the document that has been released clearly indicates that there has been collection of metadata. That is a well-known fact.
He testified that CSEC was collecting the metadata of Canadians and said there was nothing wrong with that.
It does not represent a compromise of private communications by Canadians. It's data about data, and so it is well within the legal parameters.
Well, I guess it kind of gave a lie to what we were being told, that Canadians weren't being spied on, essentially. But they still kept repeating the same line again and again. We weren't tracking Canadians. We weren't targeting Canadians. So it's okay. But the reality is they were tracking everybody, targeting everybody, Canadians or foreigners or whatever they were. They didn't necessarily know.
Hugh Segal is chairman of the Senate National Security Committee. He argues CSEC should be overseen by elected representatives who have been given access to secrets.
In other countries, the United Kingdom, Germany, France, Italy, Belgium, Australia, they do have that measure of protection, and you can have that kind of frank discussion. There is no parliamentary process in which that happens in this country, and I think that's an abomination.
Why is that so important?
Because the purpose of national security is not to protect institutions, it's not to protect individuals, it's to protect democracy. And if other countries have found a way to do this in a civilized way for decades, there is no reason that Canada can't do the same.
The government claims oversight is taken care of by the CSEC commissioner, a part-time judge with a staff of 11.
There is a commissioner that looks into CSEC every year for 16 years, has confirmed that they've acted within lawful activities here. Oh yeah, the commissioner has done that for the last 16 years, and he's an independent individual here, so I'm sure that will assure the honourable member.
Let's roll back the tape. CSEC is intercepting and monitoring millions of messages every day. The notion that one judge, however competent and hardworking, and a tiny staff are in a position to monitor that on a proactive basis is pure fantasy.
On January 17th, President Obama outlined a series of reforms in an attempt to address the privacy concerns of Americans.
But all of us understand that the standards for government surveillance must be higher.
He proposed the NSA be forced to obtain legal warrants to access metadata in future.
It's not enough for leaders to say, trust us, we won't abuse the data we collect.
If the Americans can have a system that makes sure that this data can't be accessed without a warrant and an order from a court, well, if it's good enough for them, surely it's good enough for Canadians as well.
There is plenty of evidence that CSEC is now targeting Canadian citizens with its surveillance technologies, without revealing exactly what it is doing, let alone having it debated in the Canadian Parliament. The agency and the government minister responsible for it refused to be interviewed for this story. It seems they would both like to continue working in darkness. For The National, I'm Terence McKenna.